My daughter is 23 years old now, and we're one of the lucky families because she has a place to live that is no longer with me. She's in supported living, but the route to get there was harrowing and very difficult and very crisis-driven. My daughter is a lovely young woman who is profoundly autistic as well as profoundly deaf. So there are a lot of communication challenges for her. She's had to work hard to overcome those. And her communication level is limited, but usually joyful when she uses it. Her most difficult years were probably her age 10 through her teenage years. And that's kind of when I felt like our family was falling apart. I single parented. I had my older daughter, the one with this disability, her younger sister, 2 years younger. And I was alone with them. Their father left a couple of years after those diagnoses came through and was really out of the picture after that. So I did what I could to dedicate myself to navigating every therapy, every school resource, everything that we could find to help her progress, become more independent, discover ways that she could interact with the world that gave her more control over what was happening, help her discover the things that could bring her joy, while not neglecting her younger sister at the same time. And then, trying to make ends meet, trying to make a living with all of that, with a child who it was really impossible to leave in regular, after school care. From very early on, she needed very specific skilled support, both for her autism and for her language, which was primarily sign language for a long time. And it was very hard to find, very hard to afford. As she got older and larger and stronger, managing her behaviors, which were understandable and often driven by just wanting to express her wants, became more difficult. She rarely slept longer than 2 or 3 hours at a stretch, which means that I never did. When she was awake, she was very perseverative on food in particular, one of those easy ways to find joy in life. So I would spend time throughout the day jumping up to stop her from accessing everything in the kitchen, everything in the cupboards, turning on a stove that she didn't understand the dangers of. She would leave the house and try to get into the bus, the city bus that had to stop outside our house at that time, because she knew it had taken her fun places and she didn't understand the dangers. I recall an evening when I tried to take a shower before she was asleep, which I rarely tried to do, but she was sitting watching television with her younger sister. They seemed calm. It seemed like maybe I could grab 3 minutes to get myself clean and relax as much as I could. And I heard through the water of the shower pretty quickly my younger daughter screaming for me. And I went out dripping, and she said her sister had run outside. She had run outside. She was trying to get into a car. I'm not sure why she chose that car. I'm not sure what she was hoping for from it. I ran out wrapped in a towel to bring her back in and promised her sister I would never again take a shower and leave her in charge of her older sister in that way. Just an example of what life was like, really 24/7. It was nobody's fault. It's just what we were dealing with. We had support through DDA, Developmental Disabilities Administration, that varied over those years once we first accessed it. Every time that I felt we needed more support because she was older, her needs were higher, it was very crisis driven to get that. I had months and months at a time where I would call our case manager. I would usually call her sitting on the bathroom floor upstairs so that I could cry away from the children, so that my younger daughter would not hear me talk about how close to the edge I was, how unable I felt to continue caring for both of my children, and keeping us all healthy. And I remember one conversation in particular when I said to this case manager, after months of hoping for increased services, what if I just can't? What if I tell you right now, I cannot do this anymore? And she said, well, you can call Child Protective Services and you can tell them that you're afraid you're going to hurt your children. So I hung up the phone and I didn't sleep a wink that night. And the next morning at 6:30 a.m., I had tracked down the phone number, the home phone number of our state legislator, and I called him at home and I told him about that conversation. And within a couple of days, we had that additional level of help that I was looking for at the time, behavior help, the SIBS waiver. That helps us keep my daughter at home for another 4 years or so. It was crucial to maintaining a family life. And, the fact that I was able to get that additional assistance because I was able to call the state legislator, and the reason I was able to call him and could find his number and could call him at home was that his child happened to be in school with my younger daughter, or had been at one time, and I still had that phone directory. I was so aware of the privilege that I had in being able to do that. I didn't hesitate in using it because I knew that it wasn't just me who needed it. I mean, my children whom I adore more than anything, both of them, needed a functional parent. And I was the only parent that they have in their lives. And I needed to not be falling apart for them. But I was very aware of the fact that what I had done in picking up that phone was something that many, many people would not be able to do. And that is a huge flaw in our system, that it takes that type of advocacy and pulling those strings that we can find behind the scenes to get what any family really should be able to access if we don't want the families in our community to be falling apart under the burdens of caring for delightful, bright, active, fun, humor-filled children who also require a level of supervision and caregiving and support in learning that is beyond the ability of any family, let alone a single parent. I had to share my mental health records, her mental health records, her sister's mental health records. I had to share every awful detail of the suffering our family was going through over months at a time. And then ultimately I had to call my legislator to get that level of support. And that went on for about 4 years, and it was helpful. And it was also like living in an institution at home. We had behavior specialists come in, we had personal care folks come in. The house was never empty really, except at night, when my daughter still wasn't sleeping through the night. So I still was not getting anything near the level of rest that I would have needed. And her sister was increasingly withdrawing from that whole situation and feeling like almost a stranger in her own home, which had become this institution for her sister. So that's when we looked into supported living. I started asking, what's the next step? My daughter was only 15 at the time. It was a devastating decision to feel like I needed to make. She was never going to be independent. She will never live fully independently. She qualifies for the highest level of care under supported living. So basically line of sight or earshot supervision 24 hours a day. So that decision to look for another place for Audrey to live, this was how I phrased it in my head at the time. What was that next step? She was 15. It felt too young to me. Somehow in my head, I thought 18 would be, the right age, because that's the age that other people grow up and become independent. So even though her independence was not going to be actual independence, it just felt like a safer age to be targeting. 15 made me feel like a failure as a mother. but I was failing. We were failing. We were failing at holding it together, and we were all suffering from it. And Audrey was one of the first to suffer. I didn't quite realize this until she did move. We went through the process of finding a supported living place for her. That first place that she moved to was a good hour's drive from my home, and we felt lucky to have found something that close, even though originally I could never have dreamed of sending her that far away. Because again, a busy working mom with another child whose needs were coming to the fore, that hour's drive was meaningful. I really hadn't understood before placing Audrey in supported living what a huge difference it was going to make to all of us as a family. All of us, Audrey, myself, her sister. Audrey's where I saw the impact first, probably because I was so focused on her, but also it was an immediate change. She was in a house with a couple of other housemates that was set up for their needs. And that meant that there were not dangerous items that they could access that I was constantly at home, for example, trying to stop Audrey from using or getting to. There was 24-hour supervision so that if she was awake in the middle of the night, somebody wasn't losing, that was somebody's work shift. So they weren't missing out on sleep. And they were able to, gently redirect her from perhaps pulling out everything to make a grilled cheese sandwich and turning on the stove, rather than me and my, frantic, I really need to sleep, get back to bed, Audrey kind of state. But there were other things that were like super positive changes. I mean, she had always been a very selective eater, which is so common with autism. And she started, eating a lot more and different things. I heard really quickly after she moved, I shared the list of here's her preferred foods with staff, and people started, which was a short list. People started telling me when I would pick her up to take her out for outings, oh, she had salad last night, or, one of the staff made one of their chicken and rice dishes and she loved it. And I couldn't believe it. I mean, the efforts that we had gone to try to get her to try different foods. And I had, frankly, just kind of given up a few years before. She was eating enough variety to be basically healthy, and I left it at that. And I realized that having a home where people could pay attention to that again and help her discover new things was really beneficial to her. And she expanded out in that way. She was able to go out on her adaptive bike on the days that she wanted to, because she didn't have, either a mother who was too overtired to do that with her, or who needed to get some work done or some housework done, or, whatever other distraction there was. So she just had more choices, and she took advantage of that really, really quickly. And that was, it was super helpful to see that, because it had been so hard to make that decision. So the thing about supported living that I hadn't even completely realized at the time that we made that choice for Audrey, was how dramatically it was going to change all of our lives. I mean, in that moment, I just knew that I needed a change, because I had taken on too much, and wasn't able to continue doing that in any kind of good mental health. But now, what are we now? 7 years out from that decision. It's really transformed what each of us has been able to do with our lives in my family. I mentioned how Audrey seemed to kind of expand into that new freedom of where she lived, and that I think will continue. COVID put a little bit of a damper on that for a little while, but she just has more possibilities with more caregivers who are able to give her that support that she needs with the energy that that takes. What I hadn't quite taken in was what was going to change for me, in part because I didn't fully understand how much energy was being drained by that whole situation of parenting in this way. And it took probably a year and a half after she moved out, before I started really sleeping through the night without waking up, imagining that I heard one of her either happy or upset shrieks, whatever sounds she would make when she woke up. It took a long time. It took, almost 2 years for that to happen. But what changed was I was able to go from piecing together freelance work that I could juggle around the needs of both my girls, and in particular around Audrey, since I really was the primary caregiver and wasn't able to find anyone else who could step into that role in a way that allowed for consistent employment, let alone the issues of not having slept enough to put in a good day's work. So, I went from barely squeaking by, earning a living, qualifying for, medical insurance through the state, food assistance at times, different forms of assistance that rental assistance at times that helped us make ends meet, to being able to go work full time, being able to not just have benefits at work, but like start saving for retirement, which was something that I had just given up on. It's like, I'll never retire because I'll be caring for this lovely person my whole life, and couldn't even think about, longer term implications of other things. And I'm able to do work where I can use these skills that I gained navigating systems for her and caring for her, and help other families understand how to do that. And that's immensely rewarding. I think a lot about Audrey's sister and the ways that no matter how hard I worked to find quality time with her, to create quality time with her, to make sure that what she needed mattered in our family, it was just so clear at all times in the ways that Audrey's needs dominated my time and our family space, that she knew, her younger sister just knew and learned to sort of step back from expressing her needs. She knew her needs couldn't find space in our family in that way. And that's had some profound impacts on her that are still there in her adulthood. Nobody's fault, again, just the way that things happen in a family like ours. She also has an amazing acceptance of differences in people, an understanding of and compassion for the vast range of neurodiversity and other differences that are out there in the world. And she uses that every day to create community around herself and to express love in the world. So I just think it's important to understand that while supported living felt like, and is often, I think, presented as kind of a crisis service, like when you're in crisis, if you really need this, okay, we will grudgingly hand it to you. And I'm sorry if that sounds ungrateful, but that's really what the situation feels like. And I wish it wasn't that way. I wish it was everybody can live their most expansive life, because there will come a time when this might be the choice that your family wants to make, and that's okay. And it will be a choice that will be rewarding for everybody, and for society as a whole, because we can all expand out and produce in ways and participate in ways that we were not able to, locked into this kind of institution that was home during those years prior. And I really wish that people understood that more. That's what I would wish for, is supported living as a natural next step for the families that choose to do that, for the good of everybody in the family. So the thing about supported living